the day of the funeral, what was far worse than knowing I was going to have to deliver this speech was walking behind her coffin with her sons. I mean, that was just terrible.
They called her the People's Princess. To millions, she was the shining face of compassion, kindness, and beauty. But behind that bright and effortless smile, Diana lived in a world built on secrets, unrelenting pressure, and danger that crept closer with every passing year. When the announcement came in 1997 that Diana had died in Paris, the world was told it was just a tragic car accident, a horrible twist of fate, nothing more. But her brother, Charles Spencer, never accepted that version of events. His doubts ran deep, and his words, through speeches, letters, and quiet conversations, hinted at a truth far more unsettling. What did Charles know? What did he see in his sister's final years that convinced him the story told to the world was incomplete? What proof, if any, did he keep hidden away? These questions, like shadows, never left him, and they remain just as haunting today. The night the world changed. The date was August 31st, 1997. Paris glittered under its golden lights, the city alive with laughter, love, and romance. But within hours, the same city that symbolized beauty and passion would become the stage for one of history's greatest heartbreaks. In the back seat of a sleek black Mercedes sat Princess Diana, a woman adored by millions across the globe, a mother who cherished her two sons more than anything, and a figure who had already endured years of betrayal, heartbreak, and media obsession. The car sped through the Paris streets. Behind it, a relentless storm of paparazzi followed motorcycles weaving dangerously, flashbulbs exploding in the night like sparks from a fire. Each click of the camera was not just a photograph. It was a reminder that Diana was never free. Even in her final hours, she was being hunted. Unaware that history was about to change forever, Diana sat inside that car, her world closing in, danger following close behind. And then, it happened. The Mercedes entered the Ponte Lama tunnel. Tires screeched. Metal tore. The sickening sound of crushing impact echoed in the darkness. And then dash silence. In a matter of seconds, everything had shattered. Chaos in the tunnel. Witnesses spoke of confusion, panic, and horror. Some claimed they saw a blinding flash of light just before the impact. Others whispered of another vehicle, a mysterious white Fiat Uno, that slipped into the night and was never seen again. The crash site quickly descended into chaos. Onlookers tried to help. Sirens wailed in the distance. Yet, for reasons that still raise questions, help did not come fast enough. The ambulance that should have rushed Diana to safety seemed to crawl slowly through the city streets. Reports later revealed shocking delays, long stretches of waiting, strange detours, and a slowness that felt unnatural for what should have been a desperate race against time. Why did it take so long? Why was a woman so beloved left helpless on the cold floor of a Paris tunnel, while every minute of delay pushed her closer to death? The morning after, when dawn broke the next morning, the world awoke to the unthinkable. Princess Diana was gone. Across the globe, people wept openly. Strangers embraced each other in grief. Television screens replayed the story again and again, each broadcast more devastating than the last. Flowers piled up outside Kensington Palace. Nations fell silent in mourning, and yet, beneath the oceans of sorrow, another feeling began to rise doubt. Was it truly just a tragic accident? Or was there something darker, something hidden, lurking beneath the official story? The whisper of shadows. The press, once her constant shadow, now stood accused. Their ruthless pursuit had driven her into the tunnel that night. Some called it fate, others whispered it was a crime of intrusion. And then there was the mystery that refused to fade, the white Fiat Uno, a ghost vehicle spoken of in witness accounts, yet never found. A car that seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving only questions and suspicion behind. For Diana, who had long believed she was being watched, the whispers of another vehicle felt chilling. Was it coincidence, or proof that she had been right all along? A brother's grief and doubt among those who grieved. One voice carried both sorrow and suspicion. Her brother, Charles Spencer. To him, Diana was more than the people's princess. She was his sister, the little girl he had grown up with, the woman he had tried, often unsuccessfully, to protect. He was devastated, but he was also unshaken in his doubt. The official story never sat right with him. He would later stand before the world, his words heavy with grief, but sharpened by quiet anger. His eulogy spoke not only of loss, but of the cruelty, the pressure, and the forces that had pushed Diana to her breaking point to Charles. The crash in Paris was not the end of Diana's life. It was the beginning of a mystery filled with broken metal, missing details, and unanswered questions, shadows that still linger. Even decades later, and those shadows would not let her brother rest. For Charles Spencer, the tragedy in Paris was never the full story. It was only the beginning. The answers he sought would lead back into Diana's private world, her struggles, her fears, and the enemies she had made long before that fateful night. What was Diana really running from in her final years? Why did she believe danger was always following close behind? The chilling answers lie not in her death but in the life she lived before it. It was not only a farewell, it was a defense, a shield, one final attempt to protect Diana, even in death. Charles Spencer's voice trembled as he spoke, his grief raw, his fury thinly veiled. He described his sister as the most extraordinary human being, compassionate, warm, selfless, and above all, a devoted mother. Yet what shook the world that day was not only his love for her, but the sharp edge buried in his words. Charles spoke of the torment Diana had endured at the hands of the media. He spoke of a family that had too often failed to understand her. And in front of the world, with Diana's sons William and Harry listening, he made a vow that her blood family, the Spencers, would protect her boys from the very forces that had haunted their mother. The Abbey fell silent. Millions watching from around the globe felt as if Charles had just placed blame squarely where it belonged. His words were not the polished condolences of a noble, they were a thunderclap. Never before had someone spoken so directly, so openly, at a royal funeral. Some believed it was simply grief turning into anger, but others whispered, was Charles hinting at something more? Was there a truth, too heavy to reveal on that day, hidden within his eulogy? The day the world wept, September 6, 1997, a day when the bells of Westminster Abbey tolled with sorrow, and millions of hearts broke together. The funeral of Princess Diana was unlike anything the modern world had ever witnessed. Streets overflowed with flowers, oceans of color left by strangers who had never met her but felt they had lost someone they knew. Crowds stood shoulder to shoulder in silence, the weight of grief pressing down like a heavy cloak. This was not just a royal ceremony. It was a farewell to a woman who had touched more lives than any crown or title ever could. Inside the Abbey, the atmosphere was tense, suffocating. Members of the royal family sat with composed expressions, their grief hidden behind the cold mask of tradition. But for Diana's blood family, the Spencers, the loss was raw. Visible UNCONTAINABLE, at the heart of it all stood Charles Spencer, tasked with the impossible, to speak not only for himself, but for all who loved Diana, not as a princess, but as a daughter, a sister, a mother, a friend. When he rose to deliver his eulogy, the world held its breath. The eulogy that shook the monarchia's voice was steady, but the tremor of emotion laced every word. He spoke of Diana's kindness, her love for her sons, her tireless compassion for the suffering of others. He painted her not as a royal icon, but as a woman of the people, humble, brave, and profoundly human, and then his tone hardened. Charles condemned the torment inflicted on her by the press, the photographers who had hunted her every step, who had turned her life into a chase, who had made privacy an impossible dream. His words cut through the Abbey like a blade. He delivered a line that would be remembered forever. Of all the ironies about Diana, perhaps the greatest was this. A girl, given the name of the ancient goddess of hunting, was, in the end, the most hunted person of our age. His words echoed heavy and unshakable. This was more than grief, it was accusation. Some heard only anger at the press, but others sensed something deeper. Was Charles also pointing at the palace itself, at those who had failed to protect her, even as her cries for help grew louder? A brother's vow Charles promised William and Harry that the Spencer family would stand by them, that they would be their protectors, shielding them from the same fate that had claimed their mother. It was a vow that resonated across the globe, a declaration that Diana's family stood apart from the cold traditions of monarchy. Charles seemed to draw a line in the sand. Love against duty, humanity against institution, truth against silence. Outside, the world wept. Television screens carried his words into millions of homes. People sat in stunned silence. His speech was not a carefully crafted tribute, it was the raw cry of a grieving brother, a man who refused to let his sister's story end as a neatly packaged tragedy. But within the sorrow lingered a haunting question. Did Charles Spencer use that platform to quietly hint at what he truly believed? Was his speech only farewellar? Was it a warning to the world? Shadows of doubt. For years, those words have been dissected, repeated, studied. To many, they were more than grief. They were the first glimpse into the truth Charles carried in his heart. He could not reveal it all that day not before the eyes of the world, but he planted a seed of doubt that grew stronger with time. The official story was clear. Diana died in a tragic car accident. But from the very first day, the pieces never quite fit. The whispers began almost immediately. Why did it take so long for Diana to reach the hospital when witnesses swore she was alive after the crash? Still breathing, still fighting. Why was the Ponte de Lama tunnel, in the very heart of Paris, suddenly blind that night, its surveillance cameras mysteriously not working? Why was the white Fiat Uno car seen by multiple witnesses, even said to have left its paint on Diana's vehicle, never found? Each missing piece raised suspicion. Each question, unanswered, cast a darker shadow. And at the center of it all was Diana herself. In the months leading up to her death, she had begun to step away from the palace, reclaiming her independence. Her relationship with Dodi Fayed, the son of billionaire Mohammed Al Fayed, was more than a love affair, it was a statement. Diana was no longer playing by the rules of monarchy. She was creating a future of her own. For some, this was Joyce's second chance at happiness. For others, it was dangerous. What would it mean if the mother of the future King of England married into another powerful foreign family? What would it mean for the monarchy, for tradition, for power? The French investigation concluded that Henry Paul, the driver, was intoxicated, but conflicting reports about his condition, the speed of the car, and the events before the crash left more questions than answers. Later, the British Inquiry Operation Paget was launched to examine conspiracy theories. Yet even it failed to silence suspicion. The report admitted inconsistencies, but still closed the book with one word: accident, to many. It sounded less like truth and more like another wall built to keep the truth hidden. The weight of silence when the flowers withered and the crowds went home, Charles Spencer was left alone with his grief. For the world, Diana's death became a subject of speculation and debate. But for Charles, it was not debate, it was devastation. His voice grew quieter in public. He did not speak openly of conspiracies. He did not accuse, but in the spaces between his words, people heard something else. Doubted was not the silence of peace, it was the silence of a man carrying the unbearable weight of knowledge he could not share. The night of August 31st, 1997, remains etched in history as one of the most tragic and haunting events the modern world has ever witnessed. In the Ponte la Lama tunnel in Paris, Princess Diana's car crashed, ending the life of the woman the world had come to know as the People's Princess. Official reports called it an accident caused by a reckless, intoxicated driver fleeing the relentless pursuit of paparazzi. Yet, from the very beginning, there were questions that refused to fade. At the heart of those questions stood Diana's brother, Charles Spencer, whose words at her funeral planted seeds of suspicion that still grow today. When Charles Spencer rose at Westminster Abbey on September 6, 1997, the world expected a grieving brother's farewell. What they heard instead was something much deeper. His eulogy was not simply a goodbye, was a defense, a shield, one last attempt to protect his sister, even in death. His voice trembled with grief and fury as he described Diana as the most extraordinary human being, a woman of compassion, warmth, and above all, a devoted mother. But then his words cut sharper. He spoke of her torment at the hands of the media, of the cruelty that had stalked her life, and of a family and an institution that had failed to understand her. He vowed, in front of millions, that the Spencer family would protect William and Harry from the same forces that had haunted their mother. The Abbey fell silent. For many, it felt as though Charles had dared to place blame where no one else could. His words were thunder in the quiet traditions of the monarchy, anger disguised as grief. A eulogy that felt like an accusation. Some dismissed it as the raw pain of a brother mourning his sister. Others whispered that it was something more. Was Charles hinting at truths too heavy to reveal that day? His words lingered like an echo, suggesting that Diana's death was not as simple as the official story claimed. Outside the abbey, streets overflowed with flowers. Millions wept in silence, yet many carried away the same haunting question. What did Charles Spencer truly know? In the months and years that followed, the questions only grew darker. Why did it take so long for the ambulance to reach the hospital, when every second could have saved her life? Why did the cameras in the Ponte dell'Alma tunnel suddenly fail on the very night Diana's car sped through it? And what about the mysterious white Fiat Uno that several witnesses swore they saw in the tunnel, a car that vanished without a trace? These were not the details of a simple accident. They were fragments of a mystery. Diana herself had spoken of fears, had written letters warning that she felt unsafe, that there were forces working against her. To many, her independence, her decision to live freely, her romance with Dodi Fade, her willingness to step outside palace control was more threatening than anyone dared to admit. The idea that the future mother of a king might marry into another powerful family was for some unthinkable. Charles Spencer carried all of this on his shoulders. Publicly, he fell into silence. Privately, he seemed haunted. In his writings and speeches, he remembered Diana with warmth. But between the lines, there was always something more, a tone of injustice, the suggestion that her story had not ended fairly. People noticed the way he avoided certain questions, the way his eyes betrayed more than his words ever revealed. Was his silence meant to protect himself? Or was it to protect William and Harry, still children, from the storm that might come if he spoke too openly? For years, his silence was itself a message. It became part of Diana's story, a silence that spoke louder than words. Yet silence cannot last forever. Slowly, cracks appeared. In carefully measured interviews, Charles began to speak not as a politician, not as a nobleman, but as a brother who had loved and lost. He reminded the world that Diana, the most famous woman on earth, had been astonishingly unprotected. Stripped of her royal title, stripped of the security that once guarded her, she had been left vulnerable to the forces that hunted her. She deserved better, he said. 3 simple words that carried the weight of everything unspoken. The more he spoke, the clearer his message became. Diana had not been failed by fate. Alanchi had been failed by institutions, by a system that had left her exposed and unguarded. Her death was not just a tragic accident. It was the result of years of negligence, betrayal, and power struggles that had cornered her until she was utterly alone. Charles's voice reignited the fire of suspicion. News outlets revisited the case, documentaries resurfaced, and once again the world asked, how could Diana, loved by millions, have been abandoned so completely? Charles did not present his truth like a lawyer with evidence in hand. His proof was different. It was, in Diana's own words, in the letters she wrote where she confessed her fears. It was in the inconsistencies around her death, the missing footage, the unexplained delays, the vanished car. For him, these were not coincidences. They were signs. Signs that the story told to the public was incomplete. By speaking out, Charles Spencer forced the world to question the official record. And yet, beyond conspiracy and mystery, his greatest act was keeping her memory alive. He reminded the world that Diana was not only a victim, she was a fighter, a woman of resilience, compassion, and independence. Her legacy lived on through her sons, William and Harry, who carried both her memory and the unanswered questions of her death. Every word Charles spoke became part of that legacy. Every doubt he raised became part of the truth Diana left behind. Princess Diana's death was not just the end of a fairy tale. It was the beginning of a mystery that endures to this day, a story of grief, silence, and truths too dangerous to speak aloud. And through it all, one man stood as both guardian and witness. Her brother, Charles Spencer, the keeper of secrets, the world still longs to know. The world still longs to know.